Oh, hey, look at that. Someone's here. Let me know you can hear me, friend. Yes, no, maybe so. Can you guys hear me out there? Sounds coming through. No one can hear me. You can use the chat in the actual video page to give me a sign. Cool. Thanks. Awesome. That's all I need. So, welcome everybody, such as it is so far. Hopefully we'll get a thanks again. Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag, so apologize if I ask questions multiple times or anything like that. But I wanted to make myself available to any of you guys. If you have any questions either about Codify's program, about coding in general, questions about the industry, or more job prospect related questions, I'm basically available for anything you're interested in knowing. Or if it's just about coding boot camps, about freelancing, there's a lot of things that I can talk about. I want to try to take my lead from you guys, or if you're not the talkative bunch, which seems like it might be a distinct possibility, I might just code some stuff and we'll see what comes out of it. How about that? So if you have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll stop and address them. Okay, let me rearrange my screen just a little bit. All right. So once again, any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. In the meantime, I guess I'm just going to talk about kind of what coding is, how the Codify program works, the role that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript play. Hey, there we go. Cool. Good job, Brian. Yeah, the Jurassic Park page is a fun one. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's in our pre-work playlist on the Codify YouTube channel. And it's definitely a lot of fun. It's very much a code along where you follow along with me as I code a full-on website. It's a very retro Jurassic Park fan page, but nevertheless, it's fun. Cool, John Michael. Feel free to shoot your questions at me. In the meantime, I think I'm just going to start writing some code. So I'm sure most of you guys know this, or at least are a little bit familiar with this concept by now, but HTML is the language which we use to lay down the building blocks of a given website. So anytime I create an element such as an H1 here in my HTML, or a div, every time I do this, I'm essentially creating new elements of content which will render on my page when I load it. If I open this page in browser, we can see my text now. Okay? HTML is the architecture of a given website. It's the structure. And CSS is over here. CSS is what we can use to style the elements which we lay down. It allows us to add the stucco to the walls. If we think of this as building a house, HTML is really the architecture, the what are they called? The joints, the scaffolding. Whereas CSS is the wall plastering and the paint and maybe the roof shingles. So I can jump into CSS and select, say, elements from my HTML and change their color or change their background color. or change the text in some way. If I do that and reload my page, it is markedly different. Okay, so once again, no CSS, CSS. It's not too complicated, I hope. CSS is really about laying in the styles, the aesthetics, the aesthetic choices, maybe repositioning the elements that you lay down. CSS is what really allows us to take a website and make it unique, make it visually pleasing, make it our own, rather than just every page looking like a Wikipedia page, for example. And then, of course, there's JavaScript. JavaScript is considerably more complex than both HTML and CSS. What kind of tech startups could I do as a developer? Well, as a developer, you could work at any kind of tech startup. It really depends on what kind of development work you do. And thank you, that's a pretty good question. But I want to discourage you guys or anybody else out there who's thinking about getting into coding from thinking of coding as a means for one type of job only. In other words, we get a lot of students who come here thinking that I'm going to learn to code and work for a tech company. There's nothing wrong with that. That's definitely possible. It's definitely probable even. But I ask you, what is a tech company? Is it a company that's building an application? Is it a company that's building laptops like Apple? Is it a company that's building the next smartphone like Xiaomi or something? Or is it a company like Tesla, which is a car manufacturer, but they make very state-of-the-art cars. They work on driverless cars. Those are all really tech companies, but that's not how I would classify them. Apple, for example, I'd say is more of a consumer electronics company. They make devices that we can use on a daily basis. Tesla makes cars. There's a company in this building, Kinsa, which makes a smart thermometer. It's a thermometer that connects to the Internet of Things. Technically, that makes them a tech company, but their product is not technology, if you know what I'm saying. Their product is a thermometer. They're a medical device company. So when you say tech startups, I want you to try to dig a little deeper into that question. Dig a little deeper into the kind of company you want to work for and the kind of thing that you want to do. One of our best mentors, in fact, probably our best mentor, spent years working as a developer for a grocery store, or a chain of grocery stores, a company, a very big company. But it was a company that had its presence in grocery stores. Now, that's not usually the super sexy, if you will, image of a tech company in the Bay Area that people think of. But the reality is that that's a company which had technological needs. They had development needs. They had coding needs. And they needed coders and developers to meet those needs. That company dealt in technology. It had its own internal technology tools. But it was not what would classically be considered a tech startup. Developer or programmer, are they the same? Yes. Yeah, there's no real difference between developer or programmer. You'll semantically hear the same thing used to refer to the same kind of person or the same role over and over and over again. So there's no real difference there. The more meaningful distinctions in the job types that you might occupy after graduating a program like this are front-end developer or front-end programmer, if you will, versus back-end, or mid-stack or mean stack or full stack. There are lots of niches in which you could specialize, or bundles of skills which you could learn. And it's it might be helpful to think of them as the way you might think of contractors. You know, if you're building a building, there's going to be a group of people who specialize in electrical wiring. and there's going to be a group of people who specialize in laying in the plumbing, and there's a group of people who specialize in the masonry. They're all construction contractors. They're all construction companies. They may all be engineers, but they all have their own areas of focus. And without any one of those groups, you don't really have a complete building, do you? You can't have a building without plumbing or a building without electricity. And the same goes for developers and engineers. There's lots of different schools within coding in general. So John Michael, yeah, we specifically teach front-end development. So you said you were thinking of doing your own startup. Can I ask you what kind of startup? Do you want to do like a web design studio where you design websites or web applications for small businesses? Or is this more something specific, like maybe you have an app in mind that you want to develop and build as a business offering, as a value proposition? What do I look like here? Is the microphone like right in front of my face? We're fine. Well, while I'm waiting for you to respond, I'll just talk to that end. So everyone out there, yes, building web applications, websites, etc. Okay, great. That's great. See, I wouldn't describe that as a tech startup, though. It's a startup for sure because it's a business. You're being entrepreneurial with it, but it's not a tech startup. It's more of a studio. In the same way that there are design studios or marketing agencies for companies that develop marketing campaigns, commercials, billboards, flyers, all that kind of stuff. I would describe a company that builds websites and web presences for businesses as a design studio rather than a tech startup. Other terms you may hear are things like digital creative agency or digital experience design studio, maybe interaction design, although that's kind of its own thing. There's lots of little niches in there, but that is more of how I would think of what you're describing. On the other hand, everyone from this generation that's up and coming is trying to develop that next big app idea, right? That next app that's going to make them millionaires or billionaires and going to be the toast of all the VC get-togethers in over on Sand Hill Road or something like that. And those are not necessarily tech startups. Just because they are building, developing, and shipping apps doesn't really make them a tech startup. For example, the company Roblox, which has been in the news recently for a variety of reasons, they made a gaming community for kids to interact in a safely controlled environment. And their product is primarily an application, right? It's something you play on your phone or your tablet, etc. But the application part of that product is not the product. It's just how we interact with it. The product itself is the game or the community or the ability to interface with other people, to play multiplayer, essentially. The app is just the medium, you know? It's kind of like calling a bank a paper company because they use paper a lot. Or, that's a bad example. I'm winging this. That's a bad example. Let me think. Okay, it's kind of like calling Uber a car company. It's not. Uber is much more than that. It's not an app, and it's definitely not a car company. It's a transportation company or something along those lines. Does that make sense? So yeah, people who think of building apps, that's great. That's fantastic. That's where the fun is, and that's where engineers do what they do. But if you want to be an entrepreneur or a freelancer or build your own business around that kind of thing, you want to think beyond the application, which is just the medium. You want to think about your business's value offering. You want to think about the product behind the app. You know? I hope that makes sense. It's important not just for entrepreneurs, but even for people, for those of you out there who just want to be developers and work in a larger company as part of a bigger team. It's very, very important for you as well, because when it comes time to get hired, you're going to need to think about how to add value to the company you're applying to. That is the number one most important thing to keep in mind when you apply for jobs anywhere. No matter what you do, you want to think about, how can I add value to this team or to this organization? And it should be your goal to espouse, to advertise how you yourself can add value throughout the whole hiring or interview process. The biggest issue that we often run into is students approach hiring kind of like they would approach, or did approach, applying to college or something along those lines. But it's not like that at all. It's not like that at all. There's no panel of judges reading your application and determining if you are McKinsey material. I mean, realistically, McKinsey probably does work that way. But these companies are instead made up of real people working on real teams, contributing to this company and its own product, its value proposition. And what they're really asking themselves are, is this somebody I want to work next to for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day? Is this somebody who's going to help my team meet its goals? Is this somebody who, with the right training, is going to be a real asset? They're not trying to see if you fit into some student body so you can be an unofficial brand manager, alumnus, or anything like that. There are very practical concerns which hiring managers and recruiters bear in mind, and they're the same concerns that entrepreneurs are focused on in order to make their own business ventures successful. I hope that was helpful. I feel like I went off on a little bit of a tangent. But yeah, John Michael, what you're talking about is very much front-end development. Very much front-end development. Do you guys, all three of you, do you guys, are you familiar with the distinction between front-end and back-end? Okay. All right, well, I'm just going to talk then. As I said, Codify is all about teaching you guys front-end development skills. And I don't want you to think that that precludes you from learning back-end or anything like that. Not at all. Not at all. Personally, I think that front-end is a better jumping-off point if you really wanted to learn, say, the full stack, or back end, or transition into machine learning or something like that. It's still very, very valuable and very, very helpful to start with something like front end. It is a much more achievable, a much more approachable starting off point for expanding into those more complex areas. Or not necessarily more complex, but just more. There's always more. Always more. For example, we get a lot of questions like, why do we teach HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? We teach other things. We teach Vue. We have magic hours where we teach things like a little bit of PHP. We teach WordPress. We have mentors who teach React. There are other things that we teach, but the core of the curriculum here is unquestionably HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And as I said, we often get asked the question, why are those the languages that we learn? Why not Why don't you teach Python? Why don't we start with Java? Why don't we learn Ruby? And, you know, they're valid questions. Those are all great skills to have. But HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are 100% the fundamental building blocks of all web development. 100%. You know, we get students who say, well, why don't you teach React? Why don't we start with React since that's so popular out there in the job market? It is. But I want you guys to understand that what React really does is allow developers to write a shorthand of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then when you load it up, it converts that shorthand into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Does that make sense? So in learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and learning these fundamentals, you are in a much better position to transition into React, to transition into Vue.js, or even AngularJS, whatever it is you're into. Python is a very separate thing. It's very distinctly back-end, and it's amazing for, say, machine learning, which is really hot right now, right? But Python, plain and simply, cannot do what HTML, CSS, and CSS can do. You can use Python to insert HTML and CSS into a website, but if you don't know how to write HTML and CSS to begin with, what are you inserting? Does that make sense? So really, whenever it comes to web development, everything boils down to, everything evaluates down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And JavaScript is very, very browser friendly. It's excellent for web development. It is universally understood by browsers. So it's an extremely approachable, object-oriented programming language for web development. At the same time, it's an extremely robust language. And if you learn JavaScript, if you learn it well, if you master it, you are prepared to take that same skill and apply it to any object-oriented programming language. You could go from JavaScript and learn C really easily, in fact. C#, C++, those are the languages used by, say, the Unity engine or Unreal. So if you're interested in code developing for games, that might be a solid direction for you to go. Those languages are really similar to JavaScript in a lot of ways. And if you've mastered JavaScript, the extra verbosity, if you will, of some of these languages will seem easy to you. C is really commonly used for mobile development. By Microsoft is frequently used. But then, of course, there are other shorthand languages like Swift, which is used for development for the iPhone, for Apple's mobile operating systems, iOS. All of these things are easier to learn, easier to transition into, and easier to prove yourself with if you have that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript baseline. So that's really where we're coming from with that. I don't know if any of you actually had that question. If you did, I hope I answered it. If you do have any questions, again, I see we have a newcomer. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I will get to it. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking about what Codify is all about, how our curriculum works, how the course works. Yeah. So, you know, I don't know if you guys know, really want to master JavaScript. Since I started your courses, I built a site mostly with JavaScript. Cool. Well, I would love to see it. You want to drop the link in here? I can pull it up. We can take a look. If not, that's okay. No pressure. But that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Where was I? So yeah, Codify started because 3 guys, the Brody brothers, learned to code on their own. And they did so at a point in time when the internet was really not what it is today. I mean, they're not that old, but we didn't have all of the resources available to us, or they to them, at the time that they learned to code. And it took them a long time. Like Matt Brody, one of the co-founders, he says it took him, 2 years. 2 years to learn how to code with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And he attributes that to not having a mentor, not having a roadmap for himself, not having a guide to follow or anything like that, or somebody to bounce questions off of. Excuse me. And that's really valid. There are so many materials out there for learning how to code on your own already that, sure, you could completely, understandably, conceivably learn to code on your own without any help through entirely free resources and free materials. No argument there whatsoever. But it might take you a lot longer, or it might be a lot harder, or both. It might be so hard, in fact, that you hit so many walls, you hit a dead end, and you give up. Well, that's our role here. We not only curate the information that you're using to learn, or the guidance that you're getting, we do build that roadmap for you, and we do give you the kick in the butt when you hit that wall and you feel like you want to give up. We do talk you down from the ledge when you want to throw your laptop out the window or punch through the screen. That will happen if you choose to join us, or if you're already a part of the Codify family. It will happen. You get frustrated. That's just how this works. But it's been a long time, and we have found the methods which really work for training very technical material very quickly. We are here to make sure that you get to the finish line. We're here to make sure that you have everything you need to facilitate a full career transition to a very technical field in 4 months. That is not nothing. 4 months is nothing. 4 months is almost no time at all in the grand scheme of things. That's what we're about. We're all about really helping people who are stuck in a dead-end job, or who need some way to provide better or more for their families. People who are tired of what they've been doing for the past 10 years and want to change in their lives. That's what we're here for. We're in an increasingly competitive and difficult job market where coding and not even just coding, but an understanding of how all this stuff works and fits together is more and more necessary in order to be competitive or hireable. In order to add value to a company, you need to know how all this stuff works. What other front-end languages would be great to learn after the program is over? Ooh, that's a good question. Let me write some down here on my screen. Let me know if it's too small or anything like that. What other front-end languages would be great to learn? Well, there's a lot of ways to answer that question based on your particular goals, but I'm going to give you some general guidelines. The first stop that I would make once you finish the program is definitely invest some time in learning a front-end framework. Okay, and there are 3 big front-end frameworks out there nowadays that everybody's just going crazy over. And I could speak to that for a while, but I will not. The 3 major front-end frameworks out there are AngularJS, React.js, and Vue.js. Not Python. Python is a back-end language. Python would be a good thing to learn, but I'll get there in a second. Okay, so these are the 3 major front-end frameworks out there today. Angular is not as popular as it once was, mostly because it's just so big. It is so big and heavy. It's for very intense enterprise-level projects mostly. Like if you were working at a bank or a hospital maybe. Big enterprise-level projects often use Angular. But as I said, it's not nearly as popular as it was. So it's probably not as valuable for you guys to learn right now if you're just getting your foot in the door or trying to get started with your first job. Now React.js is definitely the most popular right now. A lot of companies use it, a lot of companies need it, a lot of companies want it. And it is much lighter weight and more generally considered to be more powerful for the smaller things or the more modern applications than AngularJS. That's React, and React, if you didn't know, was built and is supported by Facebook. Angular was Google. Okay, so React is the most popular one right now. Definitely a good choice. Vue.js is the newest player to this particular field here, and it's very similar to React.js, almost exactly the same in terms of what they can do. Okay, so they're both capable of the same things. Now, some people would argue that React is still better than Vue. Personally, I really like Vue, so I may be biased. I like Vue a lot. I think Vue is much lighter weight, it's cleaner, and it's easier to get into. It's got a much less steep learning curve than React, in my opinion, and it is just an opinion at this point. So that's Vue.js, very similar to React. I do think it's going to overthrow React as the most popular front-end framework sometime soon. I may be wrong, but either way, it definitely has a lot of staying power, and it's gaining a lot of momentum. And Vue.js is supported by Alibaba. Okay, so those are the front-end frameworks. That I would suggest to be your first stop, so to speak, after this program. Definitely put some time into learning one of these pretty well. Now, no Python as a backend language. I plan to jump over to AngularJS, but React just haven't seen it yet. So again, John Michael, if you want to learn one of these front-end frameworks, I would pick React or Vue before I would pick Angular, but it's up to you. You might have a company in mind that you want to work for that uses Angular, and if so, learn what you need in order to add value to that company. Now, Ryan, you mentioned Python. Python is definitely a hot ticket right now, but Python is a back-end language. It's particularly suited for machine learning applications. Machine learning, which is, everybody's obsessed with it right now. So if you learned Python and learned it really, really well, that would be an amazing skill. That would instantly make you just exponentially more hireable. That said, Python in machine learning applications is very, very higher math heavy. Okay, so for that reason, Python can be difficult beyond the difficulty of just learning the language. Learning to write Python and use Python is definitely doable, very approachable. Learning to use Python well for machine learning purposes is a whole different animal. Okay, you're going to need to be familiar with a lot of higher math concepts and definitely some statistics in order to best take advantage of Python. But it is machine learning. Pay scale for machine learning experts is very, very high. There's a lot of that stuff out there. Some other popular languages to invest time in: Scala and AngularJS. Yeah, so if your job uses AngularJS, I'd say learn Angular. The reality with these frameworks, before I move on, is if you know one of them, you're really, really, really well equipped to learn all of them. So if you know React and you apply to a company that uses Vue, just be aware that it's probably going to be easy for you to make that jump. And they're going to recognize that. They should recognize that. You should make sure that they recognize that in your cover letter, but don't let that scare you off, okay, if you're at that point in time. Other languages are, you know what, I'm gonna just talk about one more, and then I'm gonna cut it off here because I don't want this to be about where to go after Codify. This is more about addressing questions for people who are considering Codify or considering coding in general. So briefly, I'll say some other options. PHP is really easy, very approachable option, and it opens up developing for WordPress. And if you can develop really well for WordPress, there's so much work out there as a WordPress developer, so much. John Michael, if you're forming your own web design studio, being able to develop efficiently for WordPress would get you so much business. So that's definitely a good way to go, learning PHP. And as I said, it's very easy. Then again, I mentioned C and C# and C++, which are more for gaming or a lot of mobile development. It's definitely a good way to go. If you learn JavaScript super well, C will be very, very easy. Yeah, and I'll leave it there for now. There's a whole alphabet soup of languages out there, but I want this to be about, anybody who has any questions about getting started coding. I don't want you to be put off by the acronyms that I'm just throwing out right now, because it's really not as complicated as it sounds. I feel like coders have a history of trying to make all of this stuff sound so much more complicated than it needs to, and that's a problem. But the barrier for entry is really not that high with the right guidance. Okay, so any questions to that effect, feel free to shoot them my way. Otherwise, what was I going to do? I'll jump back into my spiel, I guess. So as I said, Codify, we teach you how to be a front-end developer. What I want you guys to understand about front-end is it's not just about building websites. John Michael, you in particular might want to bear this in mind. It's not just about building websites. That's really just the tip of the iceberg. Front-end is more than anything about building internal tools for companies. Front-end is about building means for individuals to do things that they would otherwise have to do analog, like on paper or whatever, and thereby create efficiencies and save time that can be better spent on money-making efforts. So for example, if you're a small business owner, nowadays we have everything from accounting and bookkeeping software to tax filing software, tax preparing software, to Google Calendar for keeping your schedule, to email. We no longer have to wait on snail mail. All of these things are made possible with a combination of front end and back end. But the internal tools, like keeping a calendar, like your Trello board or your company's internal chat messaging system, all of that is heavily dependent on front end. That's where the value for front end really comes into play. It allows people who do not code to do things that would require code without having to code. So I know that feels like some circular logic here, but let me put it another way. If you are an editor or a content writer at a magazine or a blog, something like that, let's say every week your company puts out an article that you write and publish on the web, and it gets read by thousands of people. It goes on Flipboard, it gets featured in the New York Times, whatever it is. You are a writer, but you're not a coder. Okay, you're not a coder. And yet, every article that you write needs to be published to the web. It needs to be published as a website. And not just any website. It needs to be published as a clean website. It needs to be published as a website that is recognizable as your company's website. It needs to look like your company's website. needs to have good search engine optimization. It needs to be accessible. Follow the web content accessibility guidelines. You know, all of this stuff it needs to have, but you are not a coder. You're just a writer. You just write the article. Somebody else needs to publish it. But the reality is there isn't a developer who takes your article, creates a site, and then posts it to the web. More realistically, there is a developer who built a form, some kind of user interface, where you insert the title of your article and the date it was written, the author's name, the article itself in a big old text area, maybe a couple pictures. You upload some image files. And at the end of this form, you hit submit, and all of it gets assembled into a ready-to-go website that is clean, efficient, optimized, and looks like it belongs to your company. And that site gets published. Okay, now we're familiar with this. We all have done or seen something like this before, even just publishing a comment on Facebook. We've seen that. But that is a deceptively complex process made possible by good front-end development. It allows the editor to publish their work without having to worry about all of these little moving parts that are more about the code. And yeah, John Michael, that's where a front-end developer would be necessary. There might also be a back-end component there. There might not be. It depends on how the whole system is set up. But that is where front-end developers can really add a lot of value. It's not just in building a website, you know? If it were just about building websites, front-end developers would be easily replaced by things like Wix and Squarespace and WordPress. Not to say that Wix, Squarespace, and WordPress can always do what we do when it comes to building a website. But my point is, building websites is really just the tip of the iceberg. Excuse me. Facts. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so let's see. Where was I going to go with that? Anyway, I hope this has made a little sense. I hope it's been a little bit interesting. I hope it has shed some light on the bigger side of front-end development that often isn't appreciated or isn't talked about. Okay, and everything that I just talked about, it's mostly dependent on JavaScript. That's the by far the biggest component of our curriculum for a reason. You know, we start with HTML and CSS. That's the first, 5-6 weeks if you took the entire program. First 5-6 weeks are HTML and CSS, and then the remaining 10 are all JavaScript. And then at the very end, we introduce Vue.js. We have some mentors who introduce React.js. It's really about reading the temperature of the class and seeing where people want to go. So yeah, of the things that we teach within JavaScript, we teach fundamental JavaScript. We teach higher order functions. We teach how to program like a programmer, how to write functional code. Not just functional code, but how to write code. It's a method of programming called functional programming or functional thinking. And it's really a way of thinking about how to structure your code. I mean, that's the difference between what makes a coder and a developer. Someone who knows how to code, someone who knows how to write, and someone who knows how to write really good, efficient code. It's kind of like the difference between a copywriter and an author, if that makes sense. You can know how to write English or any other language really, really well, but that doesn't mean you can write a book that will be a bestseller. It doesn't mean you can write a good article. It doesn't mean that you can write good marketing copy either, not to put down what copywriters do. But, you know, there's a difference between writing the alphabet, writing words, and writing a sentence that communicates so much more. In the same way, there's a difference between writing code and writing code which accomplishes so much more. Code which is easy to maintain and easy to scale. Okay? I was going somewhere with that. Okay, so beyond functional programming, we also teach you how to engage with APIs. And APIs are what allow developers to not have to reinvent the wheel every time. APIs are what allow you to have a Google map on your website. It's what allows you to tap into the entire library of GIFs on Giphy without actually having to create a database of your own that stores them all or anything like that. It allows you to have access to a whole lot of data out there without having to find that data yourself first and store them in a very accessible way. It's hard to explain. APIs are a little esoteric, but they're super, super useful for the job market. It's an excellent skill to have. And every programmer should know how to engage with APIs. That's something that we teach in the later portions of our course. And then, of course, as I said, Vue.js, or rather React. We teach one of the two frameworks at the end of the course. In addition to the course itself, we have magic hours every month, every couple weeks, where our mentors or TAs or very driven grads host professional development sessions. So it's usually a 3-hour session, either via live stream like this or on site here at our on-site location, where they go into more advanced material or more niche material. Like maybe it's 3 hours spent on CSS animations. Maybe it's 3 hours spent on JavaScript bubbling. Maybe it's 3 hours on WordPress. Whatever it is, or sometimes they're just review sessions, but you also have access to all of that. And again, after our grads graduate, it's a lot of fun. After our grads graduate, they're not cut off or anything. We have an ever-growing community of alumni who are always around and always available to network with, always available to host events or magic hours of their own. They help out other students when they have questions. But more than that, they're also excellent references for newer students, in the same way that mentors and TAs are excellent professional references for when you graduate. It's a big community that only gets bigger over time. There's a lot to be gained by sticking around. And as I said, once you're part of Codify, you're part of Codify for life. So let's see, what else to talk about? Or we could code some stuff. I am going to code a loader. How many projects will we have? Well, Ryan, you have at least one project every week. A couple of them have more than one. So 16 to 19, I want to say. The number evades me right now. But you'll have a lot of projects. And these projects are going to make up the bulk of your portfolio by the time you leave here. It's the most important thing you can develop over the course of the curriculum, your portfolio. It's going to display your work. It's going to display what you can do. And I don't know, why don't I talk about our portfolio? Every student here should prioritize, either by or soon after graduation, having their portfolio ready to go so that they can start applying to jobs. I generally tell my students that, make something. Doesn't have to be your dream portfolio yet. but make something and post it, publish it, make it live, so that if tomorrow Mark Zuckerberg walks up to you in the street and asks to see your work, you can point him to a link. Or not Mark Zuckerberg, because, Anyway, if a recruiter walks up to you in the street and says, let me see your work, you can point that recruiter to a link then and there, even if it's not your dream portfolio. Once it's up, you can take all the time in the world to build the perfect portfolio that you've been after. Okay? But the portfolio is excruciatingly important because, and this is something that a lot of people do not understand, people who are coming from other industries or other fields. Coding, especially front-end development, is very much a project-based field, project-based employment, project-based skills. Okay, it's kind of like art in that way, in that it doesn't matter where you've been before, within reason. It's more important what you have in your portfolio. What can you do? I don't care who you worked for. I want to see what can you do. So your portfolio is going to bear more weight. Your portfolio of work is going to bear more weight and be more important than your resume. Okay, so if you're on the fence, if you're worried that you're never going to be able to get a job in coding because you have 10 years in construction, or you've been driving Uber for the last 4 years, or whatever it is, that's fine. Just make sure your portfolio eclipses your work experience. Make sure your portfolio eclipses your resume. And you know what? It will. If you do this program, if you stick with this program, and if you follow the steps, if you put in the time and the work, it will. You will leave here with 16 some odd projects that are already quite robust, but also which you can take and make your own. You can improve on them, you can build on them, you can make them something else entirely, but you will have a very effective baseline to start with, and you will be impressive to recruiters and hiring managers. We've had students who were hired during the program. I myself went through this program, and I got my first significant freelance job for web development, specifically web development, in week 4. It happens all the time. It can happen. You just need to be willing to put yourself out there. You need to get over the imposter syndrome that you're going to be dealing with if you join this program. Hope that makes sense. I don't know what that... What are you talking about, Ryan? All right. Well, Ryan gets back to me. Let's see. Yeah, so that's the portfolio. It's definitely the most important thing that you can leave here with. But I also want you guys to understand that, yeah, totally. There was a student who informed me that he was hired, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but he's in week 8, and he's already gotten a fantastic job. One of my classmates, when I did the program, she's at Amazon. We've got a student at Facebook right now for a 2-year contract. There's a lot of opportunities out there. And there are also plenty of opportunities and jobs at less glamorous companies. That doesn't make them any less solid. It doesn't make them any less lower quality in terms of the experience or even the pay scale. You don't have to work for Facebook in order to consider yourself a good coder. You don't have to work for LinkedIn or Tesla in order to be taken seriously as an engineer. That's kind of one of the myths that I really want to debunk. Businesses nowadays, every single business needs coding in the same way that every business needs bookkeeping or every business needs accounting. It's just part of business operations nowadays that any single business out there, doesn't matter what you do, if you produce chlorine for swimming pools, your company needs coding. All right, where was I? I have no idea. I have no idea what I was talking about. I started from portfolio. Went to getting hired. Yeah, it's gone. It's gone. So, I was about to do some code. I was, yeah. I don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'm just going to throw together a quick loader because why not? Okay, so I'm going to take this div in my HTML, give it an ID of loader, and then I'm going to jump into my CSS. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to select the div with the ID of loader. Let's give it a height, 100 pixels, width, 100 pixels, border, 15 pixels, solid, light gray, border top, 15 pixels, solid, dark blue. Actually, I'm going to go with the Codify color here. 1 ABC 9C. There we go. Just for reference, I don't memorize hex codes out of habit. I just happen to know this one because I use it a lot. In the same way that, I know white or black. So if you're already coding, if you're already a coder out there, don't spend your time memorizing hex codes. It's definitely a waste of brain power. All right, what's next? Height, width, border, border top, border radius. Actually, let's see what we have so far, so I can show you what's happening. We have created a square, and one side of that square is Codify green, and the rest is light gray. Now I'm going to add border radius 50%, and that's going to turn my square into a circle. Okay, and now since this is a loader, I want to make it spin. So I'm going to write a keyframe animation. It's going to be super simple. Transform, rotate 360 degrees. Let me turn on word wrap. Okay, now that my keyframe animation is created, I'm just going to hook it up to my loader. Animation, spin, 0.75 seconds, linear, infinite. And we have a loader. Impressive, right? Yeah, okay. But with very little code and about 2 minutes of time, if that, we essentially replicated the old Google loader and wrote our own keyframe animation. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with code that people don't normally associate with coding, and that's unfortunate because it's inherently an extremely creative thing, limited only by your imagination, not to sound like an episode of Reading Rainbow. But it really is. It really is. Let's also just put this in the center. Didn't think that would work, but it was worth a try. All right. Okay, there we go. There's a loader. It's not that neat, but it was definitely a quick build, quick little demo there. Since we're now at 5 o'clock, and I gotta call it there. But still, I hope this was at least an interesting talk. I hope this helped answer some of your guys' questions. John Michael, I've noticed that pixels and M can be tricky to use. True, and if we had more time, I'd ask you why you say that specifically. But the reason is because they're not responsive dimensions. But I'm going to leave that there. Okay, guys, so I hope this was interesting. I hope this was a little helpful. I hope you got something out of it. If you have additional questions, either about Codify, coding, the program, feel free to reach out to us, either by leaving a comment on one of our videos. You can reach out to us over our Facebook group. Any number of ways you can get a hold of us. You can even give us a call. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.